I think so. So, welcome everyone to the Teaching and Learning Committee meeting. Thank you all for being here. We are going to start, this is pretty exciting, with a gifted and advanced learning update. I hope I can keep up. Welcome.
So I'm Dennis Jutras. I'm the Coordinator of Gifted and Advanced Learning for Baltimore City Public Schools. Very happy to be in that position.
Hi, I'm Laura O'Hanian. I'm Director of Differentiated Learning.
Welcome.
So we're here to give the update on gifted and advanced learning, and I'll start with the vision. We are here to serve all gifted, advanced, and talent development students in the district with a real focus on our twice exceptional populations, which includes our students with disabilities that might be gifted or our English learners, and really working hard to make sure we're identifying the full continuum of gifted learners. We're also really thoughtful about the strategic use of resources. As a district, we have weighted dollars in the Fair Student Funding Model, and we're one of the few districts that leverages our Title I funds to support our gifted and advanced learners. The work we provide is nicely aligned to the components of the blueprint, looking at the range of offerings at schools, the differentiation educators provide to the continuum of learners, including our gifted learners, and really focused on research practices. One example of this is that each month we provide a research article to the gifted and advanced learning sites aligned to either wholeness, literacy, or leadership. This past month, it was a specific article around how to support your gifted English learners and strategies to support them.
This next slide just covers what's taken place since the last update to the board, last September in 2017. So we provided an update to the same committee. Since that time, the district has very thoughtfully allowed us to access Title I dollars, which we have leveraged to make that available. We're a very strong Title I district. Having those dollars available opened very positively the floodgates of inquiry. We had lots of schools that said, hey, can we learn more about gifted and advanced learning? And being able to leverage those dollars allowed us to not only have those conversations, but to move the conversation in a way that was productive for students. It's wonderful we can say, yeah, we know who your gifted learners are, go with God and serve them. Now we at least are able to purchase resources and materials, do the training so they could then infuse them in their classroom environment. So in June, from January through June, we're able to supply over 55 Title I schools with research-based gifted curricula or supplemental curricula such as Jacob's Ladder, M squared, M cubed, a $2,000 kit of gifted and advanced learning resources we call the GAL Starter Kit, largely focused in on differentiated strategies. But when we give that, even though we're the gifted office, we give it for those things that are for students who are above grade level, on grade level, and below grade level. Because if we're going to get any purchase with teachers in a heterogeneous classroom to provide scaffolding and to give differentiation, we have to be able to give teachers guidance for all the levels of learners in their classroom in order for that to actually be realized. We've also, any Title I school that has reached out to my office, and people, and Sean and others could attest to this, I don't say no. So when Title I schools say we would like to be a GAL site, the answer has always been yes. So much so that today, even though this is a relatively new slide, our actual number of schools isn't 75, it's 77 as of this morning. I onboarded our 77th school at Medfield Heights. So a good representation. If we go to the next slide, you'll see.
Can I ask you one question?
Absolutely.
So could you just explain briefly what let's see, gifted resources inclusive of the student books for Jacob's Ladder and the math units, can you describe just in a sentence or two what's included there?
Sure. The Jacob's Ladder is a gifted curricula put out of the College of William and Mary. And so with that, there's a teacher's edition book, and at the lowest level, there are about 50 different titles that are referenced. So we also provided the schools a whole set for the class to kind of read through for those kindergarten and first grade students. So that added a rich portfolio of their classroom library. And the M squared, M cubed materials is out of the University of Connecticut initially. And so with that, there's usually a kit of manipulatives as well as a teacher edition book that goes with it and a 3-year online digital platform license for it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for the question.
I'm sorry. With if a school calls and requests to be a gifted and learning site, do they need to have additional training? Those schools have to have additional training. Do we have the capacity to support that? I mean, it sounds like we do. If we're just saying, if you're requesting to be a gifted and a GAL site, then you can have it. Do we have the capacity for that increase in numbers and folks that want to be a part of the system? I mean, a part of that program?
Honestly, we're at capacity, or probably beyond capacity. I'm very thankful to have that problem because when we literally 4 years ago started with 10 sites, which were the obvious choices, the Roland Parks of the world, among others, and some of the Ingenuity sites and the advanced academic sites. Now we're in places like Furman Templeton, Moravia Park, places that we really honestly need to be. So when a school reaches out to my office and says they want to be a GAL site, the first part then is a conversation with their leadership team at the school to make sure that they understand that they're going to have to help us identify those students, put students in cluster groups, use individualized learning plans. But honestly, that's a requirement for all schools, regardless of being a GAL site. Being a GAL site means that my one ed specialist who's funded through Title I can serve the Title I schools to come out. We have a slide later on where we talk about the supports we provide schools. And I have one other ed specialist who is generally funded to split among 77 schools. So we do the best we possibly can to rotate through those schools, to model lessons, to certainly bring on, we have some really rich partnerships with the Center for Talented Youth, as well as a few other locations that to try to onboard and to bring people to the capacity. Right now, and I'm going to draw a fine line for everyone to understand, as this district, what we do with great fidelity is provide services and supports. We're not a district that has programming per se. So some districts, some of my colleagues in other districts have robust programming, but they also don't identify students until much later in their career. They don't necessarily have a high Title I population, and then they run the problem of having too few seats for too many identified students. Cases like New York City we've seen in recent years who've had issues because then what happens is those people that have access to learning or opportunity to learn or affluence are able to test and prep their kids as 4 years of age so they can be accepted into those programs. So right now, I see us in a transition point of providing services. Really, we've changed the narrative so that we now have schools that say, tell me more about gifted and advanced learning. And I'll be honest with this committee, I have yet to encounter any school that's asked for that. I've not yet heard anyone say something that bothered me as far as the fact that this is really a welcoming opportunity. We've turned a corner in the history of our district. I gave you a long answer, but I was just trying to be very honest and kind of frame things because we're in a good position right now. Can it be better? Could we have more people to then service the needs of all these schools? Absolutely. But that's probably true of anyone else that ever presents to this committee.
And this is some of the best use of our Title I dollars also when it comes to supporting these schools as well.
Well, and again, what's happened is because of universal screening, which we don't use Title I dollars for, but that's changed the conversation because schools get back that data. They see those results for those kindergarten students. And if I had money for every time a school said, I can't believe Dennis flagged as high, suddenly Dennis is now a superstar in that school, and Dennis didn't change. What's happened now is the teacher's perspective of Dennis, and it's opened up opportunities for our students. We are not where we need to be right now. You're going to see some data that we have 4,582 students formally identified. If you are the smart people I believe you to be, you're going to say, well, what should that number be? And I'm going to say probably 7,000 or 8,000.
Yep.
We're not there yet, but it's significantly increased over the past 4 or 5 years since I've been in this position.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Thank you for the question. All right, so we have the map. So not only are we more widely spread out, and we're at 77 sites and growing, we are in some of those economically difficult areas, those areas that lack some of those community services that we so need to be in. And that's the beauty of having the Title I access. It's really allowed us to bring in some much needed resources. It's not a huge outlay of cash per school, but it allows us to take what is already an interest at the school and kind of propel it forward. Also in that map, you'll see there's some schools that have circles around them. We have 11 EGATE sites, which the next slide will talk about. So EGATE stands for Excellence in Gifted and Talented Education.
Templeton, right, is one
Yep.
of them you mentioned.
Yep, Furman Templeton. I'm very proud and very excited. And I'll be honest, some of the schools that are really moving the needle have used their own resources to allocate a full-time person in their school, separate from us, to go ahead and do that. So Kathy Benton, who the board's going to recognize next week, and actually Moravia Park, Janine Disviskor, who the board's going to recognize next week for some recognitions they got from the National Association of Gifted Children. Those are schools that the principals had the foresight to say, we need a full-time person to do these things. So they've gone from, tough economic situations, or they have a very large EL population like in Moravia, and they're as good as any school in the state of Maryland providing services for gifted learners. And so I'm happy to say we had 4 recipients this past year, 3 the year before that, 2 each of the years before that. We've only been doing that for 4 years. We've received more EGATE recognitions than any other district in the state of Maryland each of the last 4 years as far as new designations. Roland Park and Cross Country were our first 2. They're up in a year from now, so now the cycle continues because it's a 5-year designation. And I'm happy to say we have 9 schools that are prepared to present their portfolio of documentation at the end of this month that will then be reviewed. So by the end of December, I will know, and then I can publicly let people know in January how many more new schools, but we will have more schools. You have my word on that. This slide we always show up. This is just the formal identification, the breakdown of gifted and advanced talent development. Full transparency for the board. As far as I'm concerned, once a student is flagged as one of these, the school should be very active in recruiting and supporting and developing and knowing more about that student. So a year ago when we presented to the board, I was happy to say we created a new designation called talent development, which is really where we need to be as a district. These are students who have flagged as higher than average cognitive ability, but don't yet have the achievement pieces. And the achievement pieces aren't there for a number of reasons that you are all well familiar with. High poverty, high transience. These are things that we should not penalize a student for, and we should recognize who they are and who they have the potential to be, and then very aggressively help support them and develop them. I have a feeling about this, sorry. Get a little emotional. Identification. So here is kind of where we are, more a little retrospective. So since May of 2014, we've tested now in excess of 20,000 students, because as of today, we've tested 3,068 new students as of today for this year for the Naglieri 3. It's just the 3rd edition, still Naglieri. It's the same type of test, which is a figural analogies assessment given online. I would update one piece of data that's listed there. It says approximately we have a 5.3% identification rate. When I factor in the new kids we've identified since these slides were prepared, we're at a 5.75% identification rate, which is up from 4.6 last year. So we are definitely growing the number of students that we can then say, yes, we have these kids in each and every one of our schools. And again, I'm happy it's 5.75, but it should be 8. Or it should be, it should be 10% actually, is where we should be eventually. But we're going in the right direction, so I'm going to give us yay on that one. I would also call it the following. We are the most proactive districts when it comes to that universal screening. There's a new COMAR regulation that's going to come out. It's got one piece in there I don't want to talk about, but the rest is really good. And one of the things that it's calling for is universal screening by the end of grade 3. Now, we're a very proactive district. We do it in kindergarten. Right. And I've had a number of colleagues that say, well, that's really too early. The bottom line is it's not the end of identification, it's the beginning of identification. And when we've tested kids in kindergarten, we get about a 10% hit rate. When we do 2nd grade, like we did a few years ago, we only get a 5.2% hit rate. I'm sorry, but I'd much rather identify 10% of our kids as having this potential than wait 2 more years and then find out, you know what, they're no longer flagging on these kind of of analogies types of assessments because we've drilled out that creativity. We've drilled out that kind of connectiveness. So I'd rather find the 10% and move with that. So yay us again as a district being very proactive and progressive on it. There's one other small district that does it. Largely it's second grade across the state. There's one district that's nearby, and by which I mean surrounds us, that does fifth grade. But it negates all of the brain research about early identification, especially kids of poverty. There's a question I can see.
So I have a question. When the screening that we're doing, are we paying per student? Is there a cost associated with
The
this?
district picks up the cost. It comes out of the general funds that operates for the gifted and advanced learning. It's the largest piece of my general funds. It's $9.95 a student, if you want to know the specifics.
Thank you.
Okay? It's a relatively inexpensive assessment. It's given online, and we get that feedback immediately. And then that's part of our conversation piece. We have other ability assessments called the COGAT that we can give, and we largely use it when we're talking about grade acceleration for the most part. But it's just one of the way that we measure. But it's an easy way to kind of get, if we can find 10% the first time out, that moves mountains in this conversation around gifted. I'm obviously taking a lot of time, sorry. So January through May, we've reintroduced the primary talent development, which is another way to screen for potential of students. This is something that was produced out of MSDE years ago. They've recently received a national grant, so they've reinvented, retooled these lessons. We're trying to get them infused into the pre-K, K1 and 2 levels. Right now we have 17 schools that are doing it. We want to see more universality because, as we all know, one test doesn't make or break you. But if we can see students are really kind of gravitating to this out-of-the-box thinking that we see in the PTD lessons, then we want to document that as much as possible. So we want to continue to emphasize PTD as an alternative measure. And we also have right now 8 schools that are using Renzulli Learning as part of the Title I dollars. Renzulli Learning is named for the grandfather of gifted learning in America, Joseph Renzulli at the University of Connecticut. And those sites that are using those Renzulli Learning online tools, which kind of creates differentiated learning strategies, is for every student. It wasn't just for the notion that you were identified, it's for every student. And so we're hoping to see how that maybe engages all learners at whatever level based on their interest and see what that tells us about going forward with that kind of a learning strategy.
So now I'm going to go through some of the data. As Dennis mentioned, here we say we have 4,200 students. We actually have 4,582 as of today. So we've had just an increase in the last month. And you can see here that as we break down, there is still work that we have to do around our identification. We mirror some of the trends they see nationally around students that are economically disadvantaged and the percent identified for gifted and advanced. But what is, I think, really exciting is if you look at the talent development category, you'll see, which is our fastest growing population. Right now, we were at 908. Right now, we're at 1149. So you can see we already increased that by almost over 200. So our hope is to continue identify and continue to sort of address the challenge of identifying traditionally underserved students. We have a few different strategies that we're happy to talk more about. I will say what's exciting, which we don't have here, is if you look at our demographic breakdown, our Latinx or Hispanic students are actually identifying with some of our new protocols at the rate or higher than we would expect in actually gifted, advanced, and talent development, which we're pretty excited about. But we're not seeing it across the board in all the demographic groups. So we want to continue to look at potentially more direct instruction around analogies, which is part of what the nonverbal is, maybe looking at some other measures, looking at spatial learning. So we have some ideas of ways we can start to attack this and continue to, but I think talent development was a huge step forward for us because just a few years ago, we didn't even have that category. In the next slide, we're looking at sort of our instructional breakdown. This is very similar to what you've seen in past years. The only addition here is we've added wit and wisdom to 6-8. We talked a little bit already about Jacob's Ladder and M squared, M cubed, the William and Mary units, and again with the Jacob's Ladder for social studies. One thing we did do differently this year is we offered a differentiated overlay, which was where we took all the resources and we mapped it to the new Witten Wisdom and Eureka curriculums. So teachers didn't have to sort of guess about where to supplement and where to differentiate. They had a lot more, there was a lot more clear alignment to where to do it. And we've gotten a lot of great feedback on that, so we're really excited about that. I think what's really important though here on this slide is around the individualized learning plans. Each year, and we share this with schools, and we've shared it with you for many years in a row, that we have an expectation that our students receive individualized learning plans. Later on in the presentation, when we talk about our evaluations from teachers, parents, and students, you'll see how important the individualized learning plan is for those subgroups, for those different groups of stakeholders. And we want to continue to encourage and actually require every school to do these individualized learning plans. It can take a little bit of time up front, but it can make the world of difference for a kid and their experience. And it can actually really benefit the teacher, even though the front end work of doing the interest inventory and putting a plan together for the student can be a little bit more time consuming. Once you do, you have a strategy for those students identified. And in the end, it ends up being a much better way to support that learner. So again, we just really wanted to emphasize the individualized learning plans. We're excited about the differentiated overlays, and I think Dennis already mentioned the toolkit and the resource kit, so I won't talk much more about that. We also, the next two slides, which I'm actually really excited about, and Dennis knows how excited I get about data. This is our first year creating a baseline for our different groups, so our gifted, advanced, and talent development compared to our not identified students. Now, of course, I think the gifted and advanced is sort of obvious, only because the way they're identified is through achievement measures, right? It's the ability and the achievement. So they have to hit an achievement to be identified, so of course we're going to see achievement outperforming their peers. What I think is probably the most interesting to me is watching the talent development category. Now, eventually, if a student is identified as talent development and hits in the achievement measure, we'll actually end up adjusting their category. So we're not going to be able to watch it. We might be able to track students over time, but we're not going to be able to really watch the progress of a category, because as they progress, they might move to another category. But what's interesting, I think, now I will warn you for 6-8, the talent development group has a small n, so I don't think that is necessarily significant, but I do think it's interesting that you've got a group of students with very high ability, right, that we should be seeing performing much better, right? And so that's our goal and that's our area. But what's also going to be interesting here is looking at these groups over time.
Well, while that middle grades grouping is very small, correctly identified, we should see that number grow exponentially, because keep in mind, we've been doing universal screening. This is the third year now. So we have over 1,000 students who are flagged as talent development. They may stay talent development for a number of years until we start seeing them move over. So some of them may carry over into middle grades area. Right now, what you're seeing are some students where schools have said, hey, Dennis, I think this kid might have something. Can we test? And I will say, yes, of course, let's test and see what we can find out about that student. And then they become talent development, even though the achievement pieces aren't there, but the conversation is being had.
That's right. So then the next slide is looking at math. And I think here, actually, the talent development group is pretty interesting, especially for 3-5, because it is not nearly as small of a group, and you will see a pretty substantial difference between them and the not identified students. I can't tell you exactly why this is. I have my own speculations, but I wouldn't put it out there. We're looking at analogies and nonverbal assessment, so there could be something to that and their abilities, but we don't exactly know, but I think that's great. On the right side, though, I want to make sure I explain this chart. So what's here is what you'll see for grades 6 through 8 PARCC. So I'm just going to do one category. I'll do gifted. So for gifted, you see you have an N size of 742 gifted students who took 6-8, who took PARCC, 6-8, and that they scored at the 59th percentile for proficiency. On the second bar, what you see is 128 students. Those students actually took algebra. So what we wanted to do with this slide was make sure you got to see the kids who took the traditional 8th grade versus algebra, right? And so they scored at the 80% proficiency, and we wanted to compare them to advanced, talent development, none of those kids at this point took, I think it was one, but I didn't include it because it was well below. And then the last category is the not identified and how they performed. But I just wanted you to be able to see those two groups, because when we first looked at our math numbers, we were a little confused until we pulled in the algebra, because we were wondering about our n sizes. The next thing I'd like to do is update you on some of the efforts we've done around Ingenuity. So this past year, we put out an application to all schools that had grades 6 to 8 to apply if they thought they would have space and they were interested and could service this particular goal, which is to identify, recruit, and support students with high potential in STEM from historically underserved communities. I'm excited to announce that we have one site that we'll be expanding to, which is James McHenry Elementary Middle, which will be added to for the middle school portfolio to Hamilton, Mount Royal, and Roland Park. And of course, Poly will remain our secondary site. But we're really excited about James McHenry. If you look at the map of Ingenuity sites, you'll notice that we don't have anything in the southwest. And we're really excited. The school is very excited, and I think this will be a great effort moving forward. And the application has been released for anybody who's interested. And the deadline is December 20th, so they're accepting applicants. So we'll have our first 6th grade class next year at James McHenry.
This next slide.
So I'm sorry, just before we move on, are we looking at additional Ingenuity sites for expansion moving forward?
So I think for right now, we're going to focus our efforts on James McHenry Elementary Middle. We haven't done an expansion for years, so of course we want to see how this particular expansion goes, and I think we really want to focus our efforts on that school community and how we can support them.
Where would students, it's a question, in the Northwest area go that might be interested in Ingenuity?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Roland Park is actually towards the northwest, but it's a little bit more north. James McHenry, we picked deliberately because it's in the southwest, but it's not so far south that kids can't get to it, and it was near public transit. And actually, Mount Royal, because of its centralized location, is not as hard. We see a lot of kids coming over, so we see a lot of students from like the Liberty Heights or Park Heights area coming down to Mount Royal. That's probably the site where we've seen the most students go to. Yeah.
The next slide, I'm going to refer to as the third rail. No, it's the high school initiatives, and it's only because in the 5 years I've been doing, we've had the GAL office, we focused our attention on the pre-K through 8 largely, kind of holding off on the high school pieces of it because there's a lot of work that needs to be lifted there as well. So we did, last time we presented to this body, we talked about we had begun an audit. So we solicited from every high school and said, give us your teaching syllabus, give us your curriculum for the honors courses that you've been offering at your schools. So we had more than 150 submissions from July of 2017 through this past August. As a result of going through and reviewing and using an initial checklist to like, how is this different than the Gen Ed course? How is this allied to AP Terminal or IB Terminal types of courses? The first go-around was not pleasant. We had 96 submissions and we had 0 get approved initially. I'm either pleased or displeased that I was the body saying yes or no to people, but we have to have these expectations and high standards. Schools happily were able to kind of meet some of those expectations. On slide 33, don't go now, but in the appendix there is a kind of a checklist that we're using just as an initial screener. It wasn't content specific, but again, it asked questions like, how is this course different than the Gen Ed course? How is it tied to AP standards? What standards are you aligning it to? Where's your scope and sequence? Where's the breakdown? What are your accommodations for special ed, for EL, and for gifted, which is not something we've actually have required or had those things all broken apart. So schools that really rose to the challenge, we then made available their template, what they've used, so other schools can use it. It's the beginning of a conversation about norming the honors expectations in high school. I will say to the body right now, if a school currently has an honors course offered, it has been vetted through the teaching and learning office and through the content owner to make sure that it has met at least those minimum expectations. So we're reclaiming that which kind of got away from us over the years. I'm going to say that nicely. Okay, now also part of that I should never be allowed to present in public. So the next part of that is the advanced placement expansion.
You're actually very helpful right now.
Which is why I should never present. I'm joking, obviously. So the advanced placement I'm very excited about. I taught AP for 9 years. I'm personally wed and committed to AP. The long and the short of it is there's a plan that we have to really kind of get off the ground now, but it's to have every traditional high school will have eventually at least 4 core content area AP course offerings, and the culmination will be the 2 AP capstone courses. So it doesn't matter that you didn't get into your school of choice. It shouldn't then limit the fact that you have exposure to these AP opportunities. So the AP capstone is much like that IB diploma track where the students do this project-based learning geared to their specific their specific interest area. So we're very excited about that. We have miles to go, but we have a plan. We have conversations queued up, and the honors thing was part of getting that pathway and that pipeline created. So I'm hoping we'll spend most of the time next time talking about that, right? Good job. All right, professional development. Just quickly, we have a robust in-person PD opportunity. We have online learning modules, PD opportunities. We have a partnership with the Notre Dame to get certification for individuals. So that's just an update we've always done. The next, though, I'm very excited about. So on the left-hand side, the supports. This is where my 2 ed specialists, our 2 ed specialists, who I want to call out by name, Ray Limer and Joyce Jackson, who are phenomenal at what they do. Again, those 2 bodies service the 77 schools, give or take. So what they do is they go in, they provide customized PD to support the schools. They model differentiation for teachers. They work on the ILP review process to help schools to wade through how to create those ILPs. They do the EGATE portfolio review, teacher coaching, teacher observations and feedback, not formal, obviously, they're not, but to give them as teachers themselves, and program planning evaluation. On the right-hand side, our partnership, similar to past years, I do want to call out 2 especially. Hope I'm not offending anyone. I'm not going to call out, but the Center for Talented Youth and the University of Maryland School of Medicine. There are specific partnerships I want to call out, but I do want to say this about CTY. CTY last year co-hosted with us a symposium at Johns Hopkins. We had more than 300 parents and students that came out for the morning to find out more about gifted learning. As a result of that, CTY has agreed to work with my office, and we'll be offering quarterly parent sessions. The first one is November 14th from 5 to 7 at Pimlico, and CTY will be offering a session on, so you have a highly able learner. What's the blessing, what's the curse? And then my office will be also holding breakout sessions on gifted identification and gifted instruction. We're going to host them in different quadrants of the district, so we're going to take the message of gifted to the people as opposed to them, nothing with a board meeting, but coming to one central location.
That's a great idea, and are they helping us to advertise and promote that also?
I have shared this with communication. We've also, because of the 77 schools, I have shared this now with the 200 people that are either principals or GAL liaisons. And I've also shared this with an ad hoc parent advisory group. I do need to get PCAB, though. Okay, thank you. I'm getting better and worse at the same time. All right, so thank you. We just finalized the date last week, so it's still fresh. I do want to focus in on these 2. We have emerging scholars, which we said before. We started with 2 school sites years ago, Mount Royal and Cecil Elementary. This is part of CTO. I was trying to figure out how can we identify gifted learners beyond the traditional SCAT, which was kind of like, hey, you didn't do well in the SCAT, and so they don't get into the CTY summer programming. They made a partnership with us. If the kids go through this Emerging Scholars Program, they will then qualify for free or reduced, depending on their economic need, summer program with CTY. I'm happy to say we've gone from 2 sites to the 9 sites to now 15 sites. And what Hopkins and what CTY has been very proud to say is they then challenge their summer instructors to see if they can pick out which kids got to CTY summer traditionally by doing well on the test versus the emerging scholars. And happily, they haven't. And in fact, the one teacher who called out a kid and thought maybe like this kid is super intelligent, was one of our kids that got there through the emerging scholars and not through the traditional SCAT test. They're super excited about what this means. And this is, Laura mentioned the spatial intelligence piece. So we're working with them on some research to see how can we leverage and develop those kids that are talent development into those actual scholars. And you can see a very diverse selection of schools that we have the Emerging Scholars Program in. The other great partnership I want to highlight, and at the end of this we have a brief little video we'd like to share with you, is on the talent mentoring program that we've started with the University of Maryland School of Medicine. Once a week we have 2 or 3 first and second year med students that come in to our schools. Now there's 22 of them, 22 schools. We're working with 40-something now of these medical students that go in once a week for an hour or so, do some science lessons, do some mentoring and some bonding with our kids. You can see the diversity of the sites that we're working with. These are all Title I sites, largely, I think they're all Title I sites, that we're working with. And it's opened up opportunities to the students. We also have a future article perhaps coming out of one of these medical students is a former student at a school where he's doing mentorship now. He's a product of Baltimore City Schools. So we're hoping to make that into a big high-profile leverage piece. But we'll get to some evaluation pieces here. The ILP, the Individualized Learning Plan, which is something that we have said to the board is what our minimum expectation is for every formally identified gifted and advanced learner in the district. So we survey at the beginning and end of each year for the past several years, all of our students, all the parents, all the teachers associated with it. We heard back from 600 students that took the time to fill out the survey, which is a pretty good response rate. I'll take it. 84% of those respondents said that having the ILP made school feel more fun, and 83% said it made them like school more. Those are pretty good numbers. You contrast that to the lower quadrant over here on this slide, and you'll see that 31% of the students that filled out the survey said they did not feel challenged in their general education classes, and 41% did not feel challenged in their science and social studies classes. So to have the ILP leverage and make them feel challenged and good about it at the 80-something percentile versus 1 in 3 kids says, my class does not challenge me, that is helping us to keep those students at the school and encouraged and going.
I'm going to do the other 2 evaluations very quickly because we really do want to be able to share the video. So the next one is of parents, and again, you'll see the importance of the ILP for them and the supports it provided their students. You'll also note that how important sort of this differentiated support was for some students who specifically who had some other challenges as well. I think a growth area continues to be for us parental communication and making sure that we have as much of an open communication with parents and parents understand what's going on with their students. We also surveyed teachers. Teachers also agreed strongly, which I think this is probably the single piece of data that I'm most excited about, that 80% of the teachers, the 672 teachers that responded, that they agree strongly that pre-assessment informs student grouping. I think probably one of the biggest challenges for a gifted learner is sitting in a lesson that they already understand or have comprehended. So pre-assessments are critical for the entire continuum of learners and are essential for the engagement of our gifted and advanced and talent development learners. They also felt strongly about ILPs, which was really great, so that's why we want to see even more of them.
And as for next steps and goals, again, the goal will be that all schools are GAL sites. 3 years from now, I should not say we have 107 GAL sites. We should say all schools know how to work with gifted and advanced learners, but we have 35 EGATE schools. That's really where we need to move the conversation. Continued early identification, I know in my heart and I know in the research, this is the right course of action. I'm proud of our district for leading the state in this particular action. We want all highly able students to be identified. That's where the talent development identification comes in, and that number, as Laura pointed out, continues to grow, and I think is where we need to be looking at anyway. School-based gifted educators sustained programming, again, continued Title I access. I started at the beginning talking about how we don't have programs, we have services and supports. We need to be thinking what's the next chapter in our story, and that needs to be programs, that needs to be staffing at school level to provide with regularity and fidelity the services that our students deserve. Creation of ELA and math overlays, again, very excited about the Wit and Wisdom. I think it's going to give us great purchase overall, and having the overlay there along with the Eureka Math and the M Squared is now making it so teachers that are delivering the general education curricula are also able to immediately reach out in their classrooms, and they have those resources and they know when and how. And to Laura's point, the pre-assessments are built into the overlay. If we give it to them, I believe they will do it. And then finally, normed expectations around honors and AP. We can't get to gifted, differentiated curricula until we get our honors and our AP story straight, and I think we're on the right track for that.
So we have a quick video. I don't know if we have time for it.
Well, I don't know, college and career readiness update, is that going to be lengthy also, or I defer to you?
I think that we should, how long is the video?
2 minutes and
minutes?
change.
I think we should.
Oh, okay, let's do it.
It has our kids, I mean,
And
come on.
I have another question, Madam Chair. The ILP, how is that created? Is there a team that comes together similarly to an IEP team or something like that? So you have several experts and practitioners at the table with the parent and the student. Is the student involved?
That's an excellent question. In fact, yeah, I just was with Medfield's onboarding. I was telling them that I expect the student to be part of the conversation piece. If we truly believe they're gifted, they're at least 2 grade levels above. So if you have a second grader that's thinking like a 4th grader, please invite them to the conversation. There's not a formalized, there's not a set standing team. I am working with the powers to be to have that part of the SST process. Because some of the kids that end up being referred that act out, it's because they're bored and they're not engaged. So why not be more proactive and deal with it as an assets-based conversation as opposed to a reactive conversation? But the typically it would be a principal or designee, a lead teacher, the student. Parents are meant to be included as well. If they can't make it, they are required to sign off on it as well. And we do have a place to deposit the ILP online in Infinite Campus so that it follows the students. So if they end up transferring and that still follows them. As Laura pointed out, the first one's the tough one, but after that's about refining, and we always lead with the ILP based on a student interest survey or a conversation with the student, because the goal is to make sure that we're meeting their needs, use what's already they're interested in, and see if we can spruce up their learning path that way.
We
This is
also
why
do
we have to look with the future in mind of ensuring that there's staff in all of our schools to make sure that this is implemented with fidelity.
And I think that's a great question. I'm glad you brought that up because, I mean, everyone here, we see and we acknowledge how great this team has been working and increasing the number of sites. But what I am really impressed with this team is now that conversation is now shifting to meeting the needs of individual students, and that ILP is at the center of that. And one of the things that we've been talking about is how do we work with the school's office and putting this also with into the SST piece, but also how do we work with ILEDs and ACLs and people like that to start having those conversations when they're at the school level, asking about the ILPs, asking if anyone, because that's what really it's about. It's not just about increasing the number of sites, it's about how do we make sure we're meeting the needs of our students. Great question.
And if you go to slides 35 through 37 in the appendix, there's also additional information on the ILPs, just in case you wanted to look at it, for anybody who's interested.
But let's learn about some of our kids that took part in our mentorship program that we now have 22 schools involved.
H2O.
H2O, what's that?
Water. And just put 2 drops.
We are weekly science tutors to a group of gifted and educated students, and we have an interactive science experiment. And basically we just want to get them more interested in the field, and hopefully we can get them more interested in pursuing a career.
Light blue.
Oh my
God!
So we chose to experiment because it was a reaction that happens in our own body, and we wanted to relate that, and we wanted to show that to the kids in a bigger way. And we found that yeast also has the same protein that we do.
This is what happens in our human body when we get a cut and we put hydrogen peroxide on it, only at a bigger scale.
Today we were talking about chemical reactions. So what we did were we mixed hydrogen peroxide, yeast, which is used to make bread, it makes bread fluffy, and we used dish soap and food coloring. So when you mix yeast and hydrogen peroxide, it creates a chemical reaction.
Oh, yours is
They definitely get a lot of science, but the other thing that I see in them is that they get how to work in groups together. Over the past few months, we've just seen them develop this group dynamic, and all of them have learned how to work with each other. They know each other's strengths, weaknesses, and they work together really well, and that's gonna go far for them.
I enjoy that we do these experiments. They're really fun. They're really cool.
So I think it's very important to have like scientific programs in every school because it does help them with being in class and just following directions and being basically very focused and stuff.
Oh, there you go. It's more about developing a relationship with your students a trusting relationship, one that they enjoy and look forward to whenever you come here.
But it's always a positive thing. Everyone always says something that's unique to them, but it brings a lot into the group and just creates like a really fun group dynamic overall.
Well, we try to teach them the scientific method. It's really applicable to really any field. And I think they can use what they've learned, not just the scientific terms, but the way of thinking that they can use in math, reading, any kind of field. And I think this will be a really good way to get them introduced to this way of thinking early, so then when they reach higher education, they'll have more experience with it.
That was wonderful. Thank you. And your enthusiasm is also wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you for your time, and feel free to use your card magnets. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And now we are ready for a college and career readiness update, and it's a good thing because you see what's coming.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Rachel Pfeiffer, the Executive Director of College and Career Readiness. I love that video. At the end, it segued nicely into what students need to do in post-secondary. So we will keep going with that. So as we are thinking about our work in the College and Career Readiness Office, we are looking at what our students should be equipped to do when they graduate from our schools. And we certainly are thinking of our work within the frame of the blueprint. And I think the work of college and career readiness really cuts across all three of these blueprint focus areas. We are thinking about our students as whole people and developing them in all their qualities and strengths as they prepare to leave high school. And we know that that requires them to have both the soft learning skills that we've been focused on, as well as literacy skills, the academic skills that they need. And we continue in our office where we support school counselors and all our CTE teachers to ensure that we are developing staff in a way that equips our students to be successful. When I came to you last year, I shared two core beliefs that were at the heart of our work, and those are still at the core of what we do. That students need adults to provide guidance and support, and that students need individualized plans. And so it really is great to be able to come after the Gifted and Advanced Learning team, where you've heard about ILPs and the need to discuss our students in an individualized way. And that continues throughout their time in school, that we need to think through how we're supporting our students as individuals, even though we do that work as schools or as a system. And from our perspective in the CCR office, those plans should be tied to students' post-secondary goals and helping students figure out how to reach those goals. Our work is framed in part by MSDE's definition of college and career readiness. And so we have this for you here, and I'll give you a second to look through it. And when students do not meet these benchmarks, one of these benchmarks, we have a variety of different options for them to be determined to be college and career ready. They can take a course that we offer in English or math. They can be dually enrolled. They can do that dual enrollment and take remedial coursework, or they can participate in some Khan Academy modules for different subject areas. Most of our students are participating in the college and career readiness course if they do not meet the benchmarks. And just to give you a sense of where we are in terms of students meeting those benchmarks, based on AP, PARCC, or SAT, these are the percentages of students who meet those benchmarks, and others are often, like I said, participating in the CCR course. Just want to highlight with this data you can't compare because they're different groups of students, so I want to make sure we're not comparing from 16-17 to 17-18, because one is by one is by cohort and one is by the particular grade of students, which might have included students who started at different times. But still wanted to give you the data so that you could see where students are. One note about data, typically this presentation has focused on the significant amount of data that we have related to college and career readiness, and that data is all in your appendix. So we didn't take the data out, and that's been updated with all the new SAT data that you may have heard about in recent weeks. I wanted to focus a little bit more on strategy and what we're doing, but the data is all there, and I'm happy to talk about it if you want to discuss that. Okay, so I want to focus a little bit more on what it is that we are doing and focusing on in our office. So we've highlighted students graduating and pursuing well-matched post-secondary options. Again, this idea of looking at our students as individuals, we're not just trying to funnel students only to college or only to career. We are trying to figure out what is a good fit for the student's interest and for their skills, and to make sure that our students have options. As I say often to our team, students typically, when thinking about what they're doing next, are trying to figure out big picture, right? What do I think I want to do? What do I think I'm good at? As opposed to saying, I just want to go to college, or I just want to pursue a job immediately after. And so it's our job to make sure that students get the information they need to navigate that process. Also highlighted career as opposed to just jobs, because we don't want our students in dead-end jobs. We want them on a path that has a trajectory where they can continue to grow and earn a family supporting wage. We've also highlighted citizenship, and I'll just flag that there's some work that we need to do in our office to really drill down into what that means. But as we engage with our Office of Student Wholeness and think about our students more broadly, we do want to help develop students as full citizens here in Baltimore. There are 4 key strategies that or focus areas that we're looking at this year in order to help our students achieve these goals. And the first is to make sure that students can develop the college and career knowledge and skills that they'll need in order to get into college and career. Very often in speaking to students, I find that they don't necessarily know why, if they've heard of the FAFSA, they don't know why we're asking them to complete it. Right? They don't necessarily know what they need to wear for an interview. They don't necessarily know what their resume needs to look like. And so we want to make sure that we can ensure that students have a foundational level of knowledge in all of those areas, and that we're giving them access to that so that they can be prepared to move into post-secondary life. Secondly, in order to do that, we need to prepare the adults to make sure that they are equipped to help develop students in these areas. And I think one of the things that you can expect to see from our office is that this is not restricted simply to the adults who are counselors or CTE teachers. This is going to be a citywide effort, and even in October, we gathered our college and career readiness network from across the city, a group of individuals from universities, from nonprofit organizations, from philanthropy, who all came together to think through how we could support students in completing the FAFSA. And so that group is meeting monthly. And we know that we're really going to need to rally the city around our students and not just expect for it to happen simply with the adults that are supervised within our office. Third, we're looking at pursuing high-quality work-based learning options.
I think Commissioner Bundema has a
Oh,
question.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I'm going to have to step in. I'm going to have to apologize. I'm going to another emergency board meeting. But before I leave, you said a couple things, and thank you for all the work you do, by the way. And I've talked a bit length about the similar what you just said, and you just said something that when you say that you gathered universities and groups of people to talk about the FAFSA, did you include community colleges?
Yes,
Okay.
they were
And the
well
reason why I
represented.
said is because many, we want our kids to we want them to go to four-year college. We know that. And then when we go to schools that are successful, getting them into all the colleges, that's the one beautiful thing about we get them into. But we always forget about the fact that there are students who will not get into those four-year college. And what do we do with those students? And coming from coming from a higher ed, I saw it, I see it 32 years, and some people don't believe in it, but community college is really all that they have, and it's open door policy. So I just we kind of forget to mention that when 63% of all the students in the country graduate from college came from a community college, and that's, you can check that. So I just want to throw that into, please don't forget about adding that into your literature.
Sounds good. And they were well represented there at the meeting, and we work very closely with them because we know that community, as you said, there's a good fit for each student, and we want students to be at the place they're best matched.
Yes, because a lot of people don't realize it, but 60-some% of all graduates from a four-year college their first 2 years came from a community college. And a lot of people don't. You can check that data, maybe it's in there somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Rachel.
Thank you. Really appreciate your making that point. So high-quality work-based learning we know is important to students in the city. We had 11,000 students who signed up or wanted to be a part of YouthWorks this year, and we know we only had 8,000 spaces because there's just such a demand for students to have those opportunities. We want to make sure that students are getting as much exposure as possible to different careers because, I often laugh with my team that every internship I had told me about a job I didn't want, right? It's not always that they're necessarily going to be funneled straight into those careers, but we want to at least expose them and give them an opportunity to understand what it's like to be in a work environment. So I'll get more into that in a little bit, but we do want to highlight those opportunities. Finally, our fourth area is to help students develop plans tied to their post-secondary goals. We want to have plans both for middle schoolers, actually, so 3-year plans, and then plans for high schoolers as well. We have, along with colleagues across academic offices and the school's office, identified several goals tied to these areas that where we want to see growth in the coming years. So for 2021, we would like to see 75% of seniors matched to a post-secondary education option. And again, to Commissioner Bondima's point, we want to make sure that that's matched based on their GPA, their interests, what's happening in their lives, and make sure that students get access to those opportunities. We want to ensure that students have a plan that's aligned with their interests, their performance, and their school choice, high school choice for middle schoolers, or their career aspirations for high schoolers. We recognize that planning, and I'll delve more into this in a bit, is just something that often happens sometimes without student input, and they receive a plan rather than being able to be part of a plan, and we want to get their input in the process. We want 60% of our students to have a career-aligned quality work-based learning experience while they're in high school. It may end up being more. We're still trying to get our baseline on that because that isn't traditionally something that we've really rigorously tracked, and so we want to make sure that we're tracking that very carefully. Two more, we want to look with our CTE courses that we're increasing the number of our students who are concentrators, so they're taking more than 50% of the courses in a particular CTE pathway, and we want to increase that by 25%, and we want to increase the number of, that should say completers, students who actually complete their CTE coursework and get the certification. I made a mistake. The first one is about getting the certification, and that's looking at the concentrators who get a certification. The second one is the number of concentrators. Okay, so just delving deeper into these 4 areas, I want to talk a little bit just briefly about what we did do last year, and I won't dwell on this, but these are some of the initiatives we had in place last year. And continuing this year, we are working on a review and audit of our CTE programs, and we should have recommendations in the new year, probably February, March, to be able to share with you about that. We are working to create a pre and post test about college and career knowledge. I mentioned we want to increase our students' knowledge and skills, but we don't actually know where they're starting out. And so we want to have a baseline of information that students should be exposed to, and then be able to test whether they got that information through our different strategies throughout the year. One of the things that I never want to assume is that we in our office have all the answers for our schools. And so you'll see this third bucket here is really making sure that we're discussing with schools and talking to external partners and talking to students about what's working for them, how they're getting information, how they're sharing information, to see what best practices bubble up from our schools and from the field that we can disseminate more broadly. Yes.
Ideally, good afternoon. When do you anticipate the test happening and where? So where would this pre and post college and career knowledge exam, where would that happen? I know earlier you talked about some things happening in middle school and then in high school, but ideally when would this happen and how could it potentially impact the instructional program that currently exists?
That's a great question. So we're going to spend this year kind of working to develop it. I think right now our CCR, our college and career readiness trajectory, that's lessons about some of this content, is 6 through 12. And so we'd hope that we'd be able to see where students are at the beginning and end of middle school, and then try to assess again at the beginning and toward the end of high school. I think we need to figure out where in the school day it actually fit, and that probably will look different for different schools just based on their culture and whether they have an advisory period, or if there's another place they'd want to put it.
Thank you.
So as I mentioned, we have the CCR trajectory for our students. It's lessons on everything from college readiness to career skills to financial literacy that we want students to be able to get. And I will acknowledge that the challenge has been trying to find time to fit it in the day. And so that's something we're still working on. And I hope to be able to share progress on that later on this year as we gather again next year. We've had FAFSA work. We have provided the SAT for students in school, and we worked with the mayor's office to do a job fair for our graduating seniors.
You mentioned financial literacy.
Yes.
Is that a course that we currently are offering in the district?
It's not a course. It's currently embedded in some of our math coursework, some of the, as we mentioned, with the CCR trajectory, and then some additional opportunities that students have embedded in the curriculum. But it's in a variety of different places, not just one course. So talking about equipping adults, last year we spent some time just really thinking about how we built up our CTE teacher and counseling staff. We are expanding our work, as I mentioned, to work with this college and career readiness network that is, citywide. We have launched more in-depth work across the academic offices for our staff, including our counselors and CTE teachers, where instead of covering everything a mile wide and an inch deep, we're going much more deeply in a few focus areas. So for instance, one of the things we're focusing on with counselors is college match and going really deep in what that looks like. We're engaging the community, as I mentioned, to support FAFSA completion. And so you should start to hear more about that in coming months, different places in the community. And then as we move toward the end of this school year and looking at next year, we're really going to be taking a look at how we help to match students with mentorship through mentoring organizations and other great organizations that are doing work across the city. So my hope is that as we have key takeaways from our office, that adults across the city will be able to use them to support young people. The work-based learning work was already embedded in some of our district work last year, and this year we are actually trying to create tiers to define work-based learning a little bit more clearly. It can look different ways in different places. Some people will tell you it's work-based learning and they had students, shuffling the mail in their office, right? Which is a little bit different than a student who's working in a lab and getting some hands-on experience. So we want to be able to identify different work-based learning experiences, highlight different things that people often aren't thinking about, like informational interviews or job shadowing, and making sure that our students get access to those as well. We recognize that it's difficult for schools sometimes to know everything that's out there, and so we want to work on developing a database that would allow us to provide schools with the work-based learning options that do exist, so that if they have one, for instance, a young woman that ended up in my office last year who really wanted to be a vet but was working in fast food, and the conversation was, well, what opportunities could we have for her to get something that's more aligned to her interests? At the very least, working at PetSmart, right, gets you more in the direction than working at McDonald's does. We know that that's going to require us to work with our legal office to think through how we maneuver students across the city to different workplaces across the city in a way that keeps them safe and make sure that they have the appropriate boundaries set up. And we know that it's going to require us to recruit employers across the city to believe that our students can take advantage of these opportunities. We know that with YouthWorks that there are a number of folks out there who are already ready and willing to do it, and so we just want to help make these matches possible. And finally, talking a little bit more about post-secondary planning. We need to think as a team about what planning tools would make sense for students so that planning isn't experienced as a compliance experience, but that instead it's something that is really thoughtfully done for each student with the input of each student and parents as well. So we want to be able to take a look at student interests to help students think through goal development, and then have our middle schoolers work through developing plans that are tied to where they want to go to high school, thinking through the high school choice opportunity that we have here in the city, and then have high school students think through what their post-secondary interests might be and how their decisions, both in terms of academics and extracurriculars, tie to that. Every now and then I talk to students who tell me they don't know their GPA, right? Or they don't know how their classes tie into what they might do after graduation. And that's a problem because our students need to own their academic experience, both the highs and the lows, with the goal of moving more toward highs because they feel like they're connected with the work that they're doing in class, and that work is going to help them get where they want to go. In order to do that, as I mentioned earlier, we are working with our counselors on post-secondary planning and on college and career match so that they can have the tools to be able to walk our students through this. Many counselors do it already. We just haven't provided them recently with district tools in order to make that process a little bit more straightforward and a little bit more streamlined for them and the student. Additionally, with our in conjunction with our Office of Achievement and Accountability, we have great dashboards, early warning indicator dashboard, and on track to graduate dashboard, and we're working on a college and career readiness dashboard that would allow us to identify students really quickly when they start to get off track, whether it's with attendance, whether it's with behavior, whether it's with their grades, to make sure that we can have a conversation with the student about what supports and help they might need in order to stay on track for the plan that they've laid out and committed to. I wanted to highlight just briefly our PTech program, in part because it's a great intersection of all these different strategies that we've discussed. PTech is a program that allows students to complete both a high school degree and an associate's degree in 4, 5, or 6 years. And we have 3 programs across the district, one at Carver, one at Dunbar, and one at New Era. The one at Carver focuses on computer science, the one at Dunbar focuses on health sciences, and the one at New Era is focused on transportation and logistics. Each of these programs has an industry partner. We work closely with Baltimore City Community College as our community college partner, and our students get opportunity to experience work-based learning in the particular areas they've highlighted an interest in. Oops. So as I mentioned, here's the structure that exists. We have wonderful industry partners and a great relationship with BCCC in working on this. And our P-TECH students have had the opportunity to have all kinds of different experiences. I most recently saw our Dunbar students were at the Congressional Black Caucus session, working on different cures for different things and kind of creating cures for Wakanda or something like that they were working on, just different creative project-based learning opportunities tied to their area of interest. The students work in hospitals at Carver. They have hands-on work with IBM that they do at Carver, and our new ERA students will be working with the Baltimore Port Alliance, which, as we know, has plenty of opportunities for them to get involved in already. And so when we think about what these opportunities really provide our students, it's the opportunity to create a plan, to have adult support, to develop the knowledge that they need to be skilled in these areas, and to be able to get practical work-based learning opportunities to really understand what it means to have a career in these areas. So that's what we're working on here at the CCR office, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you again. This was really great to hear. I'm going to do this because of the experience I've now had, and I have to say it as a grandparent, not as a parent, with the planning process, especially around choice.
Yep.
And I was happy to hear you saying, some focus around looking at both middle school and high school. I would also suggest you may want to throw in some elementary, because it was just as difficult to decide what the middle school program might be also. But and I'm sure you're probably doing, I just didn't hear it, the inclusion of the family and parents in that process, as the students are sort of working through it too. The choice fair is wonderful, but if you don't have some preparation and some knowledge prior to that, I'm a person that knows a lot of the schools, and it was difficult for me to have the conversation with my young person about the pros and cons of different places, because that conversation wasn't going on. So just wanted to add that, and thank you for again for the work.
Absolutely, I'm glad you mentioned that. One thing I will just add is that we are piloting a Parent Academy for Quality Education program that is parents coaching and training other parents on how to support their students in being academically prepared and academically ready. And it's neat to see from parent to parent the excitement that's happening there.
Thank you. This was fascinating and a lot. Your question? Yes.
Can you talk to I'm on slide, I'm in the appendix on slide 28.
Okay.
The performance indicator with the technical skill attainment, why did we see that dip in 2017?
That's a great question. So I think in order to answer that, I want to jump ahead a little bit to certification attempts. And just one of the things that we have been really emphasizing is more students taking certification tests. So one of the things that a school or a district could choose to do is to say, or a teacher could say, I don't think you all are ready for the test, so I don't think I want you guys to take it, right? And then my pass rate will look much better because of the students who took the test. I got those who I knew were going to succeed. One of the things that we have been focusing on is that all students will get prepared to pass those certification exams. And so they all need to have an opportunity to take them. And so as a result, as you referenced, we've seen a little bit of a drop. I am, from my perspective, I'm not concerned about that as much as I'm concerned about the equity issue of making sure that students have the opportunity to take it.
Sure. Now, can you also talk a little bit about the entrance criteria for CTE programming?
Sure.
Because I do know, and I've been meaning to talk to you, but I do know that for some schools, we have composite scores where generally our CT programs are. But can you speak to, once a student meets the composite score requirement to go to this school, what is the entrance requirements into these specialized programs at those schools?
So when a student is accepted or meets the criteria for those schools, there is, I believe, and I might need to get some additional information for you because I don't want to get this incorrect, but it will depend on the interest in the program. And if a program is oversubscribed or not. So we know that, for instance, culinary is a very popular program, so that may have more students with a higher cutoff or a higher composite score, because of the popularity of a particular program. In schools that have entrance criteria, culinary would also be available in a school without entrance criteria. And so what we found in general is that it seems that students are more interested in particular schools, and then will choose several different programs in a school where they want to be, rather than choosing, for instance, a culinary program at a school with entrance criteria and a school without entrance criteria, because they want that particular pathway.
But it's really based on interest. It's not based on, so once they get in, they choose an entrance, a program that they're interested in. There's no other requirement outside of their interest?
No, so when students are, no, that's correct. Students actually, in most cases, aren't choosing until 10th grade. Or end of 9th grade for their 10th grade classes. So even though they may say, I'm interested in culinary at Edmondson, they don't actually have to make that decision. Nobody is making them do that culinary path. When they come in and they choose their courses and they talk with their counselor in the spring of their freshman year, that's actually the point at which they are pursuing that particular CTE pathway.
Thank you for that. I think that potentially, I think that we could see more success in the CTE programming if we kind of knew the programming that students were interested in earlier on, and we kind of track them just earlier on so that they could better be prepared for these certification exams. And then also, do we have curriculums for CTE programming? Yes.
Yes, we do.
Okay.
And it can differ. Some schools have certain curriculum that they use, so not in all cases are schools in lockstep.
Okay. Thank you. And I have a couple more. So, is there any research or evidence to support when students make career and college choices, when they start thinking about that a little bit more seriously? I tell my kids all the time, in 7th grade, I knew that I wanted to be I followed that since the 7th grade, and no one told me that's what I needed to do. It was just something natural for me. So do we have any research to kind of support when kids start really making those shifts?
I don't have anything I can cite offhand. I would say that exposure is really key, and so students tend to identify as, young kids are talking about what they want to be when they grow up, regardless, right? They tend to have those conversations, and what they are exposed to will create the set of choices that they see as available options.
I would like to see when we, next year, when we start thinking about the pre and the post assessments for what we were talking about, if we could have a bit more, because I'm interested in it now too, if we could have a few more of the facts and data points and research and some evidence-based things that support when we're testing our students to kind of gauge them, with career, life, and college after high school. And then finally, since everyone is in the room, I would love to see a financial literacy course, and that be a requirement for us to graduate at the high school level. It's a thought. It's a committee, though, so I thought I would say it.
Noted.
Thank you so much, Rachel.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Question? Thank you very much. Wonderful. And now, I think we are ready for procurement.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Jeff Parker, Director of Procurement for the school system. Would you like me to read through, summarize?
Summarize, I think.
How would the board like?
Yeah.
Fine. The first contract, this is a request from the Executive Director of the Engagement Office to contract with the Family League in the amount of $210,000. It's also a request for the board to approve 50 schools' participation with 20 community-based organizations in the amount of $845,000 to provide community school services, as well as an additional $411,000 for out-of-school time services. Total contract amount is $1,466,900.
Thank you. Questions? No questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next contract is a request for the board to increase an existing requirements contract. Typically, this would be going before operations, but there's an urgent matter we want to bring to the board's attention to address mold remediation issues in the school. The request is for the board to approve $150,000 to that existing contract.
Questions? Are you?
No, I'm sorry, I was just trying to catch up with you on the mold, okay.
Yeah. Are you okay with it?
Get it
Yes.
right.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. And lastly, this is a request from the Chief Human Capital Officer to provide a Towson University Master's Degree Transformative Leadership to approximately, how many? 25 teachers in Baltimore City to receive this program. At the end of it, they will receive an Ad1 certification. The annual cost of the program for the 25 participants is $67,500. The contract runs for 4 years.
So the contract, the $67,500, that's for
5 students or just one?
It's for 1 year?
for 1 year?
25 students or just one student?
No, it's for 25 students attending
For
3
3 courses, right, and,
Correct.
okay,
Okay.
so it's 67,500.
Yeah.
per year for 4 years.
Thank you. Commissioner Cheney?
My only question, I mean, is this a new program? I'm sorry, I just wanted a little more, if,
Sure. Jeremy?
I don't have a problem with it,
Yeah.
I just wanted a little more information about it, if possible.
So the proposal here reflects a new plan with Towson University to provide these specific 3 courses for city school staff who are interested in earning their Admin 1 certification. I think an important note here is that really we are just seeking to pay Towson University directly what otherwise we would pay the teachers for tuition reimbursement. So it's really an interest in directly paying rather than having the students who are our employees pay Towson University and then later be reimbursed by us, and instead to pay Towson University at the end of a semester when the courses are provided. And there are other universities that we're in conversations with about doing the same, so that we really make it more efficient and better for our own employees.
Well, how did we come to the decision of Towson University? You said that there were other universities that you were conversing with. How did we come to the Towson University decision for this and the collaboration with them?
Yeah, so our principal leadership development team and Roxanne Four have engaged with, in conversation with Towson about this specific proposal since sometime last year. So they approached us with the proposal, and that led to this.
I know, I just know that we have other universities in the city, and I was curious to know how they would be open to something like this versus Towson. That's why I would like to know how we came down to Towson for this and not the other universities. I know that Morgan does a program very similar to this with Baltimore County schools. I'm curious to know how we came to Towson. It's a nice program. I'm just curious to know.
Yeah, I think that's why I emphasized what I did. So I expect we'll be bringing more of these to the board. This is really an interest in creating a situation where we're paying the university directly instead of paying 25 students who have to put the money up front. And we're not specifically directing people to Towson University for this any more than any other college or university.
So is it fair to say that teachers are choosing Towson?
I mean, they would be. So this is, again, if no teachers chose to enroll in this course at Towson, we wouldn't be paying Towson anything. It is based on an expectation that some teachers will continue to choose Towson.
So is the process really different from, is it just an agreement that we make with the university to say that we will give X amount of dollars for these students so that they don't have to be reimbursed? Is it just an agreement that is made between our system and the university, or is it a way more in-depth process?
Mostly that is what this represents. So in the absence of this, what happens right now is the university charges the full tuition for a course up front to our staff who are enrolled in the course. And at the beginning of the semester, our staff submit an application for tuition reimbursement. And when they complete the course, they submit their proof that they've completed the course successfully, and then we reimburse the portion that their collective bargaining agreement specifies for us to. This is, so Towson as an example here, and other universities have indicated they are interested as well, is saying instead of charging your staff up front, we're willing to wait until the end of the semester and then submit to you a list of your staff who completed courses successfully, and then you would just pay us directly for the portion that otherwise would be reimbursed.
The piece that I was really interested in and was the fact that we worked with Towson, it says, in terms of collaboratively in terms of creating what the coursework might be, which was to help to be certain that we had the type of leadership strategies and competencies that we needed for folks here in the city. So that was the piece that I was really interested in and sounded interesting. So I would love to, in the future, maybe just see what the course actually entails. But it's good to see that happening, and I look forward to seeing other partnerships with other of the universities around.
To add on Commissioner Chenier's point, because with this, we have a city school staff member aligned with their faculty at Towson, collaboratively guiding and teaching folks through this program. So I think that's nice. But I'm also interested in the other universities that are within the city too, as we move further along.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. We do have one person signed up for public comment, and there may be other people who want to comment, but is Christina Duncan Evans here? Thank you.
I also have a question about the written update.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't. Can we do this first since she's here? Okay, thank you. I forgot to mention the 21st century update, but we'll come back to that because we have, thank you.
Hi, my name is Christina Duncan Evans, and I am a school librarian, and I'm also a steering committee and founder of the Baltimore Movement of Rank and File Educators. I'd like to start by talking about the spirit of my comments, since I've come a couple times and spoken. I really come and spend the time here each month to help you help us. As a teacher, I've always really valued the opportunity to learn more and deepen my craft. And as an organizer, I'm constantly connecting with teachers who are doing really inventive work, who are thinking really hard about their work, who need support, who need resources, but who mostly need to be connected to more learning opportunities about the really important work that they're doing. And I'd also kind of like to ask the board, and specifically this committee, to think carefully about your power and your authority to check the operations as you see them. I think that there's an important oversight capacity that exists here, and I think that while you're asking a lot of questions about outcomes, I think it's really important to also ask questions about inputs. For example, I think that it takes a really great team to put together a presentation, a wonderful presentation about college and career readiness. That's a small team that puts that together here at North Avenue, but across the city, that takes hundreds of guidance counselors to carry that work out. And we already know that our guidance counselor ratios are not where we want them to be. So I think asking important questions about who's actually going to be doing this work in buildings and what it looks like on the ground can help ensure the fidelity, that the excellence that we see here in the presentations matches what students are actually getting in their lived experience. Quick note, there already is a financial literacy state requirement course. The problem is there's no time allotted in a high school student's schedule to teach it. It's also very unclear in COMAR who's supposed to be teaching that course. So I'd like to go back to wit and wisdom texts that are still arriving at schools for Module 1. Earlier, I heard from a teacher that wit and wisdom texts, including workbooks, will not be repurchased. So there's an idea floating around that I would like to kind of hear about, that what we buy this year is it, and that workbooks are going to have to be photocopied in future years, and that we're not reordering texts from year to year, because that's concerning. A teacher asked me to speak about bridge projects happening in second quarter as opposed to later on in the year for high school students. If those high school students are working on their bridge projects in second quarter, but then are required to continue testing throughout the end of the school year, students don't take the test seriously, and it makes the school's test scores look artificially low. And given that there are accountability measures for those test scores, there seems to be a little bit of a disconnect about how bridge projects are having some unintended consequences. Moving to the new schedule for the 9 to 12 curriculum selection, it would be helpful to see an entire schedule of what that year looks like. I know that last year the process started in November for the selection of wit and wisdom, and all throughout the spring we were concerned that there wasn't enough time for educators and other stakeholders to review the materials. The selection process was very unclear, and that summer PD is not enough for a smooth implementation. It's not enough, also not enough time, clearly, for teaching and learning to be able to provide and create the local supplemental materials that are needed to scaffold a out-of-the-box curriculum to our specific students, because we saw this year that there wasn't enough time in the implementation calendar to really provide the supports for our students as they transition to this new curriculum. So seeing the entire schedule for what the 9 to 12 curriculum looks like would be really, really helpful. I'm talking to teachers, 9 to 12 teachers, ELA, who don't know that a new curriculum is coming next year, have not heard about this in any way, shape, or form. I think that the biggest question on my mind is, why are we implementing a new assessment at 9 to 12 and new testing in the same year? When PARCC started, there were years of preparations, and it was like shifts to Common Core, got to get ready for PARCC. Like, it was 2 years, maybe more, of teachers learning about the 6 shifts of Common Core and learning about PARCC. But now we're on the end of PARCC, and it's crickets. We don't know what's coming next. I don't even know the name of the tests that are coming next. We don't know how they're going to be aligned to the standards. And it seems really, really confusing to implement a brand new ELA curriculum and brand new testing in the same year. It will be completely confusing for teachers to understand how their students are doing relative to the new test if we don't have a familiar set of material that we're working through, that we're familiar with, if you get my drift. So I'm really urging that everyone kind of pump the brakes on adopting a new curriculum for 9 to 12 because there are still significant issues to work out with the implementation of wit and wisdom in K to 8. And I think that the onus is on the Office of Teaching and Learning to show that they can really successfully implement a big box curriculum before we go through the process again. One last point. Identity projects are planning to happen in 6th grade social studies. I want to really put a caveat here. You need to check and see if 6th grade social studies is being taught, because wit and wisdom is taking up the English block and the social studies block. So while there are many teachers who have been able to fit in a little bit of social studies here and there, and that goes beyond 6th grade, that is across grade levels, for the most part, social studies instruction has not really happened that much this year because wit and wisdom is taking up so much time. So if identity projects are slated to occur in a time and space that technically only exists on paper, you're going to end up with the same thing where there's the financial literacy requirement where, yeah, we have a financial literacy requirement. We have resources for financial literacy. There's training. Several years ago when I was a high school social studies teacher, I got an iPad as part of like this whole training module that teachers went through, but there was no time to teach it. And so all of that went for naught. And so those are my comments. Thank you for listening.
Any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your coming. I always appreciate your questions and your
I would
interest.
actually add, I would just, because I think what is very beneficial, I'm sitting here and I know I take notes and all of these things, because we do need to be able to respond to this and also, just reflect on our own practices. Are you able to send that to Mr. Gant as well, your questions or concerns, for us to be able to have those documented and be able to look through them as a team? Just in case I may have missed something.
Sure, I can type it up and send it to you, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you again. Sorry. We have the 21st Century Learning Update, and I believe...
Yeah, just the written, the report and the written, the professional development that is happening for the ongoing professional learning that's happening in the 21st century schools. I was just curious to know who was facilitating that. I know that Dawn Shirey, that's primarily her right. So is it just her, or a part of it, right? But is it just her, or do we have a group of folks that are implementing this professional learning in these 21st century schools?
Although that Dawn's almost like an office of one, it's a cross-functional, the work that she's doing. So she'll work with Stacy Davis in the Teaching and Learning Office around the technology piece, and I've observed Stacy's team actually deliver professional learning in the summer to, I think it was Fort Worthington was coming online. They also have different partnerships with various organizations that also deliver the professional learning as well, and I've actually even seen Dawn deliver some of the professional learning herself.
Because I know that everyone's overtaxed, I get it. But I just wanted to know how they were able to do that on top of all of the other things that she is doing, and as we're about to open up a few new schools also moving forward.
Well, I think there's also, and I get it, everyone here is doing probably like 2 to 3 jobs, but I think there's an excitement around the work that Dawn does, because a lot of this is just really grounded in what the instructional leadership team and their staff and community identify as what their need and what they want. So I do think that there's an energy around this work that allows us to continue to always forge forward.
Sure. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much. Unless there's anyone else who wanted to make public do you have, okay.
Good evening, you all. So my name is Ebony McKeever, And I not only sit here in front of you as a member of PCAB, but I also sit here as an educator with Baltimore City Public Schools and also a parent to 7 students who have either formerly been or are currently a student in Baltimore City Schools. So I guess for me, as I sit here, and this is now, I believe, the second Teaching and Learning Board of Commissioner meeting that I've been to, I guess for me, my issue is just making sure that with every presentation we have, that we're also more transparent in terms of how we've involved community and parents and other stakeholders. So listening to it tonight, I heard us talk about use of Title I funding for gifted and advanced learners. And for me, my question becomes, how do we decide that the Title I funding was the appropriate use for the gifted and advanced learners? I understand the priority and I understand the benefits, but did we ask parents what would be the most appropriate use of these Title I funds, and if they would have believed that maybe these funds would be more importantly used towards something else? Also, too, listening, I found out tonight that there's a parent academy being piloted. I know as PCAB, we knew nothing about it. I also know that as a parent, I knew nothing about it, and I currently have 2 high school students, so this would have been useful information. I do know that at one particular school that one of my children goes to, there is a big push around FAFSA, so maybe some uniformity in the FAFSA program as it's implemented around the district and parent involvement. I also know I'm looking too at the CTE programming and being a educator at a CTE school. I know that there has also been issues raised by parents about student placement in CTE programming, and I know you raised that issue earlier. Are there enough seats? Once students are being funneled into these schools, they may not get a seat at another school. However, now they're on a CTE program or pathway that is no interest of them just because we're keeping them in the same school. So I think that these are all concerns that as a parent, an educator, and a member of PCAB I have. So again, I'm just kind of imploring teaching and learning to also be more open when we're talking about how we're involving parents and communities in the decisions that we're making as a school community. So that's it for me.
Thank you for being here, and thank you for coming. Before you leave, I tried to take notes as fast as I could as you were going, but it was fast. So I don't have good notes. If you could possibly make a list of the concerns that you have just given us.
Absolutely. I have them all written down for you.
And okay, that would be wonderful.
I have like 6 of your cards at this point, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, don't need another one, but yes.
And another commissioner.
And I appreciate the input that you're giving on parents being more engaged in the process of the gifted and talented programming. I don't think all of our Title I funds are going specifically to that.
No. I know that not all
You're
of
just
them
saying
are
that the
going,
use of some of that, of Title I money, just being engaged in the process of if we're going to use it for gifted and talented, that parents are engaged in that.
Right, because I know like the primary concern with Title I funding is that it's supposed to promote learning and achievement for everyone in the school. So are we using the Title I funding for everyone in the school community where this gifted and learning Title I funding is being used for? Are we just using it for a segment of the population? And so that becomes a very important, caveat when you're talking to parents and how those funds are being used.
Sure.
So I get the benefit. I also understand that there are some times where Title I money is being left on the table, and if that's the case, then I can kind of understand how. Well, I know within certain schools they weren't accessing all of their. But yes, but I digress. I just wanted to make sure that this was something that, as I guess a decision-making body, that there was.
And I know Dennis mentioned that they just got the confirmation from Johns Hopkins with the parent academy. So I know that they're going to be doing engagement with PCAB because he mentioned
it.
Yeah, he mentioned it. And then finally, if you could, since you're on the PCAB board, in what ways is PCAB recruiting additional members for PCAB, additional parent and community members for that board or that that group?
So right now we have a push, anytime that Baltimore City Public Schools has an event, I know we're there with our table set up, but I also know that right now we're working to develop a plan where PCAB members are going to each and every school within Baltimore City to make sure that parents are aware what PCAB, does and how we can best serve not only the individual school, but the community as well. So that's the big push right now. But I also know that, like myself and other members, are using social media too as a way to kind of express what we have going on in PCAB. So even like tonight, because I'm here, if you, I guess, click Baltimore City Board of Education, you'll see that I was here and I was saying, become involved, let your voice be heard. Here's the agenda so you all know what's going on for tonight. Public board meetings, we're here and we're doing the same thing as well.
Yes.
Could I also say, if you recall last week when we had the budget forum, we were talking about some additional meetings. And so I want to just say to you, and I know it's going to be coming out, but to let folks know that that one question you had about input into the use of the funds, the district-wide priority engagement sessions, there are going to be 4 of them around the city. That's the ideal place to come and to have that conversation, to bring
And
that.
let me tell you, there were several broken hearts because our PCAB meeting was at the exact same time as the budget meeting being held in the room last week.
Well, you got the 4 other times, so you have plenty of time.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you all for being here. And I think we are ready to adjourn. Thank you all very much.